Next part. The Genoese bourgeoisie in the Age of Discovery. Even more important than the political relations, however, and certainly more directly germane to our interest in the Portuguese as the historical force that laid the basis for the Atlantic slave trade, were the merchants and bankers of Italian origins who colonized Portugal. What did I just say? What did I just say? The colonists had to come somewhere. Right. And the Spanish kingdoms during this period. Though Verlinden's use of the term nation is more figurative than political, his characterization of the historical significance of these capitalists is helpful. And here's the quotation. Italy was the only really colonizing nation during the Middle Ages. From the beginning of the Crusades onwards, Venice, Pisa, Genoa, later Florence, and southern Italy under the Angevins, Angevins, as well as under the Aragonese, we'll go with that, were interested in the Levant and in the economic and colonial possibilities offered there by the gradual waning of the Byzantine Empire. It is also at about the same time that Italian merchants appear in the Iberian Peninsula and obtain an influence that will persist until far into the modern period, both in European and colonial economy. Virginia Rao notes that the earliest documental references that we have concerning the activities of Italian merchants in Portugal date from the 13th century. When they came to our notice, they had already boldly found their way into the Portuguese money market. These Italian merchants were, in fact, in order of importance, Genoese and the sons of Piacenza, Milan, Florence, and Venice. Further, we learn from Rao that by the 14th century, whose beginnings were appropriately marked by the appointment of King Diniz of a Genoese, Manuel Pezagno, to the Portuguese Admiralty. In 1317, Lisbon had become the great center of Genoese trade. With Lisbon and Oporto as bases of operation, the Genoese merchant capitalists ensconced themselves. That I looked up that word because I already read this before. Settled or established. Look. Hey. Okay. Themselves into the entire structure of Portuguese power, serving as creditors to the monarchy, financiers for the state's ambitions and adventures, monopolists under royal characters of security, and ultimately Portuguese nobles by a series of events including royal decrees, marriage into the native nobility, and participation in military projects organized by the state. That's really important. We put a little mark. Very demure. Precisely as Rao's example of the Lomini family would suggest, beginning with the appearance of Bartholomew Lomlini, I don't know, the merchant in Portugal in 1424, and ending with integration of his heirs and relatives in the landed aristocracy of Madeira and the peninsular nobility by the end of the century, the Genoese merchant princes proved to be far more successfully adaptable than their countrymen, i.e., Italian competitors. Unlike the arrogant Venetians, the Genoese made themselves available for their hosts financially, intellectually, and fraternally, as Wallerstein has observed, to the extent that the Portuguese bourgeoisie lacked the capital, they found it readily available from the Genoese, who, for reasons of their own having to do with their rivalry with Venice, were ready to finance the Portuguese, and the potential conflict of the indigenous and foreign bourgeoisie was muted by the willingness of the Genoese to assimilate into Portuguese culture over time. While the Venetians continued to concentrate on the domination of the Mediterranean and the Florentines on their banking and wool trade in continental and North Atlantic commerce, the Genoese Makes me angry sometimes when I mess up. Wait, why is the lighting like that? Much better. While the Venetians continued to concentrate on the domination of the Mediterranean and the Florentines on their banking and wool trade in continental and North Atlantic commerce, the Genoese positioned themselves to take advantage of the trade and eventually would progress from the Maghreb in the mid-Atlantic and finally the transatlantic. By the middle of the 15th century, it was their capital that determined the direction and the pace of discovery. Verlinden remarks, Lagos in, oh man, oh, I had 10%. We're good. Lagos, Portugal, became from about 1310 an important harbor on the route of the Italian convoys to northwestern Europe. If one remembers that Lagos, much more than Sagres, was the starting point of the first Portuguese discoveries, the importance of the bonds established there with Italian seamen and businessmen grows evident. Moreover, it was the favored status of these Italians in Portugal that facilitated Portuguese claims to Rome, resulting in papal bulls sympathetic to Portuguese commerce and state imperialism, and it was Genoese capitalists who sustained the links between the English and the Portuguese ruling class by assuming a relationship to English trade and the state directly complementary to their presence in Portugal. In England, as in Portugal, Genoese made up the bulk of the Italian merchants, who in turn composed the majority of alien merchants in the kingdom during the 15th century. There, too, they won royal exemptions from commercial taxes and restrictions and managed to monopolize imported goods as diverse as the foreign medicines, like medicated treacle, Treacle, and other drugs in vogue during the century, and Portuguese cork and sugar at whose points of origin they had already contracted exclusive monopolies. Finally, in England, too, as creditors for its kings, but isn't that interesting how these people that are like the bourgeoisie are getting like socialism for them? Exemptions from commercial taxes and restrictions, monopolization of imported goods. Finally, in England, too, as creditors for the king, as factors and merchants for royal monopolies, they came to occupy special positions in English trade. In vain, the English petitioned against the lavish privileges obtained with a great sum by these merchants from greedy kings whose financiers Anyways, in vain, the English petitioned against the lavish privileges obtained with a great sum of these merchants from needy kings whose financiers they had become, begging that they might be restricted to bringing goods of their own manufacture. Unable to vie with the mighty Italian cities in wealth, the English towns received scant attention. In an England rent by civil war, court intrigues, that's what it looks like, intrigues, and a fractious aristocratic class, the financial support of the Italians, along with their trade and concomitant sources of intelligence, would be decisive. The English monarchy, with its Italian and other foreign commercial and financial collaborators for the first time being, secured an independence from its native aristocratic and bourgeois classes. Okay, it was it was in this way that Italian capitalists situated themselves to play a critical role in determining the pace, the character, and the structure of the early transatlantic slave trade in the next century. Without them and the complicity of part of the English aristocracy and of the Portuguese and English merchant classes, and of course the clerical nobility of Rome, it is doubtful that the Portuguese Empire would ever have come into existence. Without that empire, nothing would be as it is. And I want to go back in time and and blow that empire up. Anyways, the Portuguese Empire did come into being, however, and from the middle of the 15th century and for the next 100 years, to the good fortunes of both its national and expatriate sponsors, its mixture of greed, piety, savagery, militarism, cultural arrogance, and statecraft swept across the world. Not surprisingly, given the long-standing preoccupations of medieval long-distance merchants, the winds of commercial interest blew the empire first to the south and east. Oh Lord, we're gonna have to look these ones up. Wait, Senegambia. Haha, never mind. Senegambia, Elmina, and Luanda along the coast, along the west coast of Africa. Safala, Mozambique, and Mombasa on the African east coast. Hormuz in the Persian Gulf. Goa on the Malabar coast of India. Malacca in Malay, and Ternate in the Moluccas. And if their several motives still perplex us, at least to some of them the issue was clear. When the Portuguese finally came ashore at Calicut, some astonished Tunisians, traders, in the crowd asked them what the devil had brought them so far. Christians and spices. That was comedic gold. What has the devil brought you? Christians and spices. That was funny. That was funny. That was funny to me. Christians and spices was the answer allegedly given by Da Gama's men. This close association between God and Mammon formed the hallmark of the empire founded by the Portuguese in the East, and, for that matter, in Africa and in Brazil as well. Once the Portuguese had rounded what was for them the Cape of Good Hope, and perhaps even before they reached that point, these voyagers had become actually an analog of the Chinese who preceded them. We refer to them, of course, to the seven massive imperial expeditionary fleets commanded by the Muslim admiral Shang Ho between 1405 and 1434. Shang Ho died that year. That had already confidently essayed these waters for trade and plunder. The Chinese ventures that, with their fleets of junks carrying sometimes as many as 40,000 people, amounted to convoys of impressive intercontinental missiles, according to William Appleman Williams. With its fleets, the Chinese Empire successfully challenged the Arab and Muslim traders who had already grown accustomed to their domination of the East African and Indian Ocean commercial trades. This did not please the former masters of the trade of these seas, but it did not seem to matter. Whatever the weight of their resistance, it never amounted to enough. Whatever the weight of their resistance, it never amounted to enough to be included among the reasons speculated to underlie the apparently sudden imperial decision to forego further adventures in the area. The withdrawal would seem to have been an affair internal to the Chinese Empire. The Portuguese, less audaciously, but necessarily more cunning, accomplished the displacement of the area's resident tradesmen at the end of the century and the beginning of the next. Momentarily, the maritime markets most coveted by Europeans were in the hands of the Portuguese/Italians. The African and the South Atlantic trades with their gold, salt, malagueta, pepper, gum, cork, cereals, sugars, and slaves, and the trade with the East with the spices, wools, and dyes. These Portuguese monopolies was, however, not entirely contested in Europe. In the Atlantic region, Castile's commercial strata had shadowed its rival ventures along the Guinea coast from at least as early as 1453 through 54, laying claims through the Castilian crown to both Guinea and the Canary Islands. The controversy between the two Catholic kings continued even beyond its formal resolution by the Treaty of Toledo in 1480. And into the following century, it was punctuated by raids by each of the other merchant shipping and trading posts and by claims and counterclaims to ancient or papal privileges. Though their defeat would prove to be only a temporary setback. The point is that the monarchical I don't know this word. Hold on. Wait a minute. Claimant. A person making a claim. Okay. Of Spain lost. With the South Atlantic closed to them for legitimate merchant exploitation, the Spanish crown and its native and Italian partners began to explore the possibilities of an entirely different route to the east. Okay, next part. And then we're going to do, this chapter is not that much, I don't think. No, it's not. Girl, that's going to be so easy, but yeah. Okay, peace out.